Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast. Yours truly, Solomon Wilcoxon. We're joined by our Bleav in Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, how you doing today?
How you doing?
Hey, look, doing great. We're entering now that phase of the offseason as we're now just a week away from the NFL scouting combine. We're just 1 month away from free agency. And the Bengals have the 17th overall pick in the upcoming draft. It's time to go shopping for players. It's time to start to improve the roster. And I want to start by talking with some of the Bengals' needs. I'm going to name them, and I want you to tell me what comes to mind. Wide receiver and tight end are at the top of the list. Then offensive tackle. They could use another cornerback to go with the many young defensive backs they have currently, and we're going to talk about that. And then an interior offensive lineman at the guard position. When you hear about the Bengals having need at those positions, Charlie, what comes to mind?
I'll start at wide receiver, and we'll have the T Higgins debate. We'll continue to have the T Higgins debate. I think what hasn't been discussed enough is the Bengals lose T, then what? And I don't think what's been given enough, conversation hasn't been in the conversation enough is, well, if they lose T, then they might need to get a veteran for $8 to $10 million and use a first or a second round pick at that position. The Bengals, if they lose T because of how they built their offense, a Manning style shotgun offense that's based on matchup advantages and a quarterback who takes advantage of them better than anyone else. Yes, the offense will be fine with Burrow and Chase, but what their identity is, and I mean, the coaches have told me this since they started this thing, is built around multiple receivers. And now, again, we'll continue to talk about T, but because of what they'd have to do to replace T, I mean, that has receiver number one on my list. Defensive line and would probably be 2 and 3. Looking at the edge and defensive tackle, they have to remake that whole room. And then they probably need 2 starting guards as well.
Well, let's face it. I think a lot of Cincinnati Bengals fans, because the Bengals have been so good, right, at finding wide receivers who are talented. Let's face it, in a year that we drafted Joe Burrow with the first overall selection in the 2020 draft, they were very fortunate to find Tee Higgins still sitting there. A lot of people had a first-round grade on him, but he was there in the second round coming out of Clemson, and the Bengals hit a home run. But the fact that he and Burrow have been together for their entire careers, their chemistry that the two have, not to mention the chemistry that Burrow has with Jamar Chase, you're not going to find another wide receiver in free agency or in the draft that's going to walk through that door and pick up where Tee Higgins left off.
Yeah, there's a monetary value of these picks too. So let's say that, you let T walk and all right, then you spend $8 to $10 million on a wide receiver, and I'll make up this number. But what do you think a first round pick is really worth in their real salary? $10 to $15 million on average would be like the real, like if these guys were free agents and they weren't rookies, a first round pick, or really you'd have to be an early second round pick if you wanted a receiver worth anything. That's probably worth $10 to $15 million. So that's $25 million, which is about as much as T Higgins costs. And I'll reiterate this as well. This is something I very much know is the case with how many coaching staffs around the league come from the McVay tree, come from a very similar view of offensive football. Like these good receivers, they all like the same guys and they all get taken very quickly. It's like, you either have to go get your guy in the first round, or every year there's a run in the first 10 picks of the second round. And these guys don't fall, like Xavier Legette. No one thought he'd be a first round pick, but there he is because he was someone from that coaching tree. And it turned out everyone else liked Xavier Legette too. Everyone else liked Keon Coleman too. So the Bengals with their second round pick would have never even had access to the second round receivers that they probably would have liked. So it'll probably be like $25 million of real value that you'd need to replace T, or you could pay T Higgins $30 million.
And that brings us to discuss T Higgins a little bit more because at the time of this recording, the Cincinnati Bengals are now on the clock for their ability to be able to use the franchise tag for the second time. They've never done this before in franchise history, use the franchise tag on a player twice in back-to-back seasons. They'll pay 120% above what they paid last year, which will bring the guaranteed total for 2025 salary for T Higgins at $26 million. I think you just described perfectly what the market is. And to me, I think that would be in perfect alignment. You and I both know if they sign into a long-term contract, the average annual salary is going to be right about $26 million a year, if not even higher, Charlie.
I do think it's malpractice if the Bengals don't give T the tag. I also think it's maybe not malpractice, but bad practice if they have T play on the tag. The signal that sends to your locker room that, we won't even get something done in 3 years for someone who is an elite culture guy, not just about the right stuff, sets the tone for the right stuff in that room, and probably frustrates Joe Burrow if you string this along another year with the guy that he's been stumping for you to pay forever. That's not the road I want to go down. You also can't let T walk in free agency. So that takes us to a very critical 3 weeks. The Bengals should apply the tag, but they shouldn't let it go into free agency. What I think should be the case would be the smartest course of action would be either sign T to your extension before the start of free agency, which has happened with star players across the league, because what that does is it reduces the cap number for Higgins in 2025. So it gives you more flexibility for your own, you can go out and spend $5 extra million on a guard because you've lowered T's cap hit, or you trade T if that's the decision. I wouldn't agree with that. But you have, what I agree with even more is that you have to make this decision before the start of free agency. So, if the Bengals trade T in August, what are they going to do with $25 billion in cap space? No, you need to make these decisions now so you know exactly what you have, exactly what you need, and exactly the money you're working with.
I would think, and from everything I'm hearing, that they have prioritized that they want to bring him back. So I have to ask you this question. What if they were to use the franchise tag on T Higgins only to buy themselves time to continue to negotiate a long-term deal? But yet they've had about 2 years to get that deal done. And as we saw when the franchise tag was used for the second time on Kirk Cousins, when he was playing for Washington, when they used the tag for the second time, he refused to negotiate. So that is possible. I tend to believe that T wants to stay in Cincinnati, wants to continue to play with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. But that's one of the scenarios that could play out. If the Bengals use the franchise tag for a second time, it would be akin to holding him hostage more so than having him on board as a volunteer, because he does want the long-term contract. So to all of that, you say what, Charlie?
You do have until the middle of July to get, someone on the franchise tag signed to an extension. And I would rather draw this out until July and keep T than I would lose T. You know what I mean? Even though that my first choice would be get this done now. Second choice, get this done in July. Third choice, lose T. But the second choice, get this done in July. Again, what I was saying about the cap space. It might cost you another linebacker. It might cost you really getting the guard you wanted as opposed to a kind of a bargain level replacement guard that you don't really believe in now having to be your starter at right guard. Like, it will cost you something tangible, whether it's jumping up a tier of player that you could get, or maybe it is a whole player, because you will lose cap space by not having T on that reworked deal at the start of free agency, because with him on the tag, he counts for that full amount charged on your cap sheet.
What is the likelihood with the Cincinnati Bengals going into the offseason with roughly just north of $40 million in cap space? What's the likelihood that they could re-sign and keep Tee Higgins, but also re-sign Trey Hendrickson to a long-term contract and keep the league's leading pass rusher on the roster as well?
Yeah, you mentioned the cap space. It's important to note that what that doesn't count yet is they're probably going to cut Sheldon Rankins. They're probably going to cut Jermaine Pratt. They're probably going to cut Alex Kappa. They're probably going to cut Sam Hubbard. I believe that in itself is like $35 to $40 more million of cap space to use. So they have some of the most, they're in a fantastic cap position. They're probably in the best cap position you can be for a team paying its quarterback $55 million. Yeah. You can get all of these extensions done, because what these extensions do is lower the cap hits for Higgins and Hendrickson. So instead of counting $25 million on your cap, Higgins costs 17, let's say. And instead of costing $20 million on your cap, Hendrickson costs a 16. You do create more flexibility by getting these deals done in a way that pushes money towards the back end. While I'm very all in on keeping T, I'm not quite as in on Hendrickson being the core piece of the defense going forward. And I know that's controversial, but I'm very much a believer in let's have Al Golden build a defense that can grow and gel together for the next 4 seasons, a unit with more upside that can last and be prolonged. Also, when you look at all the needs they have to address, like you were saying earlier, when I think they need multiple defensive ends and multiple defensive tackles, and I think they need some more draft capital to really get all of the boxes they need checked. They only have 6 picks right now. So I would trade Trey and reset kind of option 1. Option 2 would be, keep Trey. And I probably wouldn't want to have Trey on a long-term deal when you look at how guys in their mid-30s kind of do tail off a bit pass rush-wise.
Trey has been adamant that he doesn't want to play out the final year of his contract, which is only 1 year left. He wouldn't want to do that here in Cincinnati, that he would want to either be traded or be signed to a long-term deal with the Bengals. And if not, then he would want to be traded where he could go elsewhere and sign for a contract. And speaking with him, he just says, hey, I'm not going to play forever. I want to be able to take care of my family. And I think he's made it known to the brass with the Cincinnati Bengals of what his preference is. Joe Burrow has also made it known. He's been making the rounds, doing a lot of interviews. And, he mentioned something that I've even mentioned in the past, that the Philadelphia Eagles and the Miami Dolphins have, already gone down this path of paying their quarterback $50 million a year. And then one wide receiver, $30 million a year, and Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, respectfully, for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then that second receiver, whether it's Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith, getting around $25 to $28 million a year. And so Joe has used those teams, including the Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles, as a model for saying, hey, yes, it can be done. So to that, what would you say? And also, I guess we have to address that if you're going to go down that path, you're going to have to give up maybe something on the defensive side of the ball.
Let's look at Milton Williams, for example. He's a free agent. Let's say the Bengals keep Trey. Milton Williams is an incredible free agent. Let's say the Bengals had the opportunity to sign him. Would anybody say, no, the Bengals have their pass rush covered? They already have Trey Hendrickson. They don't need another pass rusher. They need
more. They need more.
No. So why are we saying that at wide receiver? I don't see why there are not equivalent diminishing returns at receiver or defensive end or defensive tackle. Just have the best players. And it all comes out in the wash at the end of the day. You have 1,000 plays over the course of the season, split between offense and defense. You want the guys who can make the most plays. And if you make 600 of the 1,000 plays, then you go to a conference championship game or the Super Bowl. So for the Bengals, Higgins and Chase behind Burrow are their best 2 young players. Hendrickson's their 4th best. There's a lot of value in keeping him too. He isn't one of the young players, though, which is worth noting. But keep your best young players. It just so happens that the Bengals' best young players are receivers, just like the Dolphins, just like the Eagles, just like the other teams that have built this way. You build with the most talent you have access to, and the most talent the Bengals have access to is Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase.
They've gotten it right in the draft. They drafted all 3 of those players, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Tee Higgins. You and I both know the next step is to sign all 3 players to a second contract, given the production that they have had. I want to go through some of the players that are expected to be unrestricted free agents, and I want to hear from you just a chance of what do you see happening, or do the Bengals keep them, or do they move on? We already talked about Tee Higgins, so let's go ahead and separate him out from B.J. Hill, Mike Gesicki, Mike Hilton, who's close to my heart because he's been such a tried and true player for this franchise, and Von Bell, all expected to become free agents at the start of the new league year.
All these guys, and this is kind of a boring answer, but it depends on the market. I think that Mike Gesicki is the one the Bengals would love to have back the most when you look at how he changes matchups and personnel groupings. And for a tight end who's not breaking the bank, he really does have a more significant impact on the tangible X's and O's and how the game is played and which people are out on the field and who's lined up where than your usual tight end. So now he hasn't gotten the big contract that he kind of missed out on because the coaching staff in Miami didn't set him up for success with the way they were in their offense during what was the part of their career where Gesicki was supposed to get paid, and then he made a bad choice going to New England and their terrible offense. So he has to set himself up the best he can, but there's the clearest fit and value with the Bengals. B.J. Hill, maybe he'll have starting value in the league. And if that's the case, respectfully, he made some game-changing plays, franchise-changing plays for the Bengals. But got to improve the defensive line. That's the talk of the offseason. And if you've got to improve your defensive line, you've got to make changes on your defensive line. Mike Hilton literally changed the way I look at the slot corner position. I don't know that anyone's been more fun, but also just impressive and talented to watch at his position than Mike Hilton. But they were taking him off the field on 2nd and 3rd downs last year, and run-stopping nickel corner isn't really a role in the NFL. And as a result, because you have a guy like Dax Hill who can move inside, DJ Turner, Josh Newton can move inside, I think because you'll have to be banking on young players somewhere, they do have the guys to do that at nickel. And then safety, Von Bell, again, franchise-changing plays, but he got benched in November and was a special teams player down the stretch. And as much as everyone loves Von, guys like that on 1-year minimum deals usually don't come back the following year.
Yeah. Look, the Bengals used draft picks on the interior defensive line last year. They wanted to add depth, but they also needed more playmakers on the interior portion of the defensive line. It was very slow to come around. I do Bleav the defense improved, particularly in the final month of the season, but not good enough to at least where they expect. So talk to me about how McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins fit in the future. We know they're going to be on the team, but how do they fit in the future as Al Golden looks to rebuild this Bengals defense?
I think the Rams defense are the best example of this. They based, Aaron Donald retired. They basically rebuilt their whole defensive line in one offseason. And what they did, to use a baseball metaphor, is they did the platoon system. You do this, you are great at this. You're not good at this, we're not going to ask you to do that. And they did that across the board, basically, with except for Jared Verse. And I like a platoon system, and specifically, Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson can stop the run. So you put them in there when you need some bigger bodies. You're playing AFC North football. McKinley Jackson, I think, does have maybe a bit more pass rush juice than people give him credit for. But you're not going to be asking him to do that a ton. You're going to be needing to get 2 new defensive tackles who are your starters. Because you have 2 run-focused guys, get 2 pass rush-focused guys, one with a high-round pick, one nice, solid, young free agent, young veteran free agent, and kind of rebuild your room that way.
Remember, Bengals defensive captain Jermaine Pratt has requested a trade. You already mentioned that he could be released and turned loose on the free agent market, which that would make him happy if he's not traded. He seems to want out or seems to want to move on. That leaves really Logan Wilson as our only proven commodity at the linebacker position. How do you think the Bengals will approach this offseason, looking to maybe fill that role vacated by Jermaine Pratt, where we've had these pair of linebackers that's been really good for this defense? How do they approach moving forward there?
Yeah, Logan Wilson isn't just the only known commodity at linebacker. He's the only known commodity on the entire defense. Logan's a good starting spot. He's very much going to become the foundation, the core, the base. Al Golden's building around him. Logan's his guy that he loved in the draft process. Jermaine, great Bengals career in stretches, but when you look at what the problems that the Bengals faced last year were, tackling, specifically
missed
coverage
tackles.
Over the middle of the missed tackles, yes. Coverage over the middle of the field. They didn't get beat deep a ton. They got picked apart over the middle, which kind of falls on Jermaine, and then run defense as a whole. And then also there was a heart and soul missing from the defense that Jermaine Pratt maybe just, he was the captain. He wasn't replacing in that way. So a name I'm going to drop here, and this guy's retired, so the Bengals aren't going to sign him. But do you remember Josh Bynes, who signed with the Bengals in 2020? And he was a nice player. And he was $2-3 million. And he tackled. He was very smart. He was a future coach. He was a leader. He was a winner. He had done it. He knew the division. And like Logan Wilson 2 years later, I did a whole story talking to him about how Josh Bynes set him on the right course for his career. So who's the next Josh Bynes? And this guy won't break the bank, but is it, Ernest Jones? Is it Robert Spillane? Is it Bobby Wagner, if you want to go old but a big name? There are guys like that who at a cheaper price could do this for this young core and kind of could be like a connector for the defense as a whole.
Yeah, they certainly need that stabilizer at the linebacker position to play alongside Logan Wilson. They will be looking to fill that role and not have to spend a lot of money to do it. I know that's what they're going to be looking to do. They could find someone in the mid portion, in the mid rounds of the upcoming draft to be able to do that. We'll just have to wait and see. I'm going to name you 5 players who are currently on their rookie contracts playing in the Bengals secondary. And all 5 of these guys, you and I both know, they need exponential growth in production coming up in the 2025 season. I want you to tell me, how do you think they'll fit in Al Golden's defense, and what the future holds for Dax Hill, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, Josh Newton, and Cam Taylor-Britt. These are young defensive backs who are on their rookie contracts, who've been recently drafted and very high, by the way. And now it's time to really produce, isn't it?
It's funny because it all goes back to T Higgins. And part of the plan was, all right, you have to, reallocate resources for all the young players you have coming up. This was supposed to be Dax Hill and Cam Taylor-Britt's extension year. And, this was supposed to be the time where they were these top picks who were borderline Pro Bowlers, or, we thought Cam would have been a Pro Bowler in 2024 entering the season. That was a common hot take out there. And then you line up, you get paid, you build the defense through the secondary, and then Dax tore his ACL, and then Cam just had an extremely up and down season that kind of got away from him for a stretch. So it's a complete unknown. It's a classic. Let these guys kind of duke it out during training camp to see who the starters will be. I like what I've seen from Dax in the slot over the last couple of years. I think there's very underrated value in having a true coverage guy as your slot corner, because of what that unlocks for the defense, because he can drop back to safety. Dax can blitz. He's shown that. The Rams game in 23 was a perfect example of that. So I'm optimistic about Dax. Cam, we all know it's in there. That's probably going to be Al Golden's biggest task from a player development perspective, is unlock more from Cam. He'll be a starter, but can he be a Pro Bowler, or is he a guy who's going to have to take a one year, $4 million prove it deal in 2026? And Josh Newton, a nice piece of depth. Jordan Battle will probably be competing for a spot. He showed some solid things. He improved with his routes and his range, but there's another leap to take. And kind of he's a good representation of the Al Golden effect, coaching up young guys to play fast and play smart and to be communicative. That was something the defense wasn't good at with Lou Anarumo with the young guys. How good is Al at being able to instill that confidence in Jordan Battle, who's still young in his career and has only started 15 games or so? How much can Al bring that out of Jordan, almost too from an intangible standpoint more than anything from the jump?
DJ Turner was a guy, until he injured his shoulder, I thought he was coming on and starting to perform really well in 2024, then was lost for the year. And because it's not a leg injury and it's just a shoulder injury, you tend to feel that his movement is going to still continue to be good. He's known for having the vertical speed. You get the sense that that'll still be good because it is a shoulder injury that cost him most of the season in 2024. What are the prospects for him? And after mentioning those guys, do they look to add in the draft or in free agency on the back end in this secondary?
Yeah, so what I Bleav at cornerback and defensive back, and you would know this a million times better than I, maybe you had an experience like this. I very much Bleav it's the light bulb comes on position. It's you see a couple plays and you're oh, that's it. He gets it. He's playing he knows he's going to win. And DJ, to be honest, I thought was playing some benchable football, I guess is the best way to put it, before the Chargers game. And the Chargers game, I thought, was the light bulb come on moment. I was seeing everything I wanted to see from DJ Turner, and I expected in a moment. I wrote down in my notes, this is going to be the turning point for him. And then as he makes the best play of his career, he breaks his shoulder. So can he build on that? Maybe, hopefully that light clicked. But it's also, now he's got to kind of start that process all over again. Another guy who can Al Golden empower to play fast, play smart, iron out some of the wrinkles and some of the mistakes he was making. That's big on Al. Because, Dax is nearing the end of his rookie contract. Cam's reaching the end of his rookie contract. I want to see a round 2, 3, or 4 corner thrown into that mix, just so they have another young guy under contract, because you kind of do need to make sure you have corners down the road for all scenarios, and you can never have too many corners. And I'd always use one of those picks I'd always use one of those picks on a corner, just because, man, if they pop, that changes your whole defense. And but the story of the season on the defense as a whole will be, I think, Cam and DJ and Dax. Are these great corners who can lead a championship defense? Or are the Bengals going to have to find 3 completely new corners in 2026?
Where I think we're looking at a complete overhaul on the defense because there's need at all 3 levels of the defense as we get ready to enter free agency and the 2025 draft. We need to add in the interior portion of the defensive line. They need to add another pass rusher. Myles Murphy has to be able to come on for this team. The light has to come on for him. You need to add at linebacker and then in the secondary. And we haven't even talked about the interior portion of the offensive line at the offensive guard position, which you and I both know is a huge area of need for the Cincinnati Bengals. They're going to be one of the most really interesting teams to cover this offseason. Charlie, you and I will be right here every single week on the Bleav in Bengals podcast, and we want our viewers to join us because we expect to provide some answers to many of your questions. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll be back again next week right here on the Bleav in Bengals podcast.